Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Meerkat Musings. I'm your host, Ben, and today's topic, as you've already gathered, is maybe going to be a little bit controversial to some. Maybe it will rub some people the wrong way. Do I particularly care? No. Basically, this is a little bit of a rant at how disappointed I am. Not surprised, unfortunately, but disappointed in the recent policies of our Labour government. In particular, the policies that they have lined up towards people on benefits and people who are disabled, people who are, for whatever given reason, unable to work, and people who therefore rely on benefits. Basically, for reasons that only Keir Starmer and his cabinet can explain, they have decided that in order to balance the books and recoup money, and I do understand why governments need to do that, they wish to cut benefits to people. Now, this is basically a means of squeezing those who are already struggling, because the money you get from things like PIPs and that kind of thing, it's not spectacular. This is a way of squeezing those who are struggling the most and kind of squeezing every last penny out of them, when there is in fact another option that would raise a lot more money that wouldn't involve having to touch people's benefits. And that is through a wealth tax, which some Labour MPs, to their credit, have mentioned, but it seems, unfortunately, that we are not likely to see this actually happen. Now, I have discussed this before over on my websites, and I have actually provided some fairly detailed examples of how much money you could raise through these things, and also how you could do that. And, despite all the caterwauling that you hear from certain quarters about it, you can do that. And those who are rich and wealthy could remain rich and wealthy. The only difference would be is that they wouldn't be quite as rich and wealthy as before. But believe me when I tell you that, they'd still be extraordinarily well off. They'd still have a lot of zeros following the numbers in their bank account. They wouldn't want for anything, but they could help other people not have to kind of scrape by or slip into debt or into poverty. And yet, when you mention these ideas, you get pushback. Ironically enough, sometimes you get pushback from people who are themselves struggling in the working class. And you can only assume that they have fallen very, very hard for various forms of propaganda, manipulation, because they can't understand why anyone who is within the working classes, or for that matter within the middle classes, would be upset at the idea of their taxes not going up and at the super rich paying more of their fair share. Because at present, these extraordinarily wealthy characters, yes, you can say in terms of tax brackets, yes, they pay a lot. But they also have enormous fortunes that could actually go a long way towards helping a lot of people. Just to give you a broad idea here, you could easily kind of, this is going to sound wrong in some respects, but you could easily siphon £50 billion from the top 5 wealthiest families in the UK, the top 5 wealthiest people. And all those people would still be billionaires. In fact, they would all be billionaires several times over still. And that's after you took £50 billion from them. And that £50 billion could be invested in any one of a number of ways. It could go towards the NHS. It could go towards our schools, our police, our infrastructure. And it's, a pretty significant chunk of money to put towards any one of those projects. But instead, our Labour government, and the Labour government should be a party for the people. Instead, what they're doing is they are planning to squeeze those who are already struggling even harder. And I cannot, for the life of me, understand why they would do that. To be fair, I mean, I've never particularly believed that this iteration of Labour would be substantially different to the Tories. I think it's impossible to be any worse than the last 14 years we had of the Tories, because let's face it, they were horrendous. Easily one of the worst governments on record, particularly when we got around to that boorish troll Boris Johnson. But then the current Labour government is thus far not doing enough to distinguish itself from the Tories. I think they are better, but that is a low bar to clear. What they should be doing is doing more to distinguish themselves from those policies. And what they should be doing is looking after the working classes, the people who voted them into power, I might add. And they can do that by, among other things, thinking, right, how about we actually stop some of this rampant profiteering that we're seeing, and we channel that money into public services, into making sure that we do not have people dying on the streets of, hypothermia, making sure that people have enough to eat. These are all things that the government could do and should do, but they won't do. And I think that's absolutely shameful. I think it's shameful of any government, really, when they're in a position to do those things and they don't. It shows that they care more about protecting profits and shareholders and all that kind of crap. And just to give you another indicator as to what's been going on here, Thames Water are about to receive a huge bailout, and that's via the taxpayer, because they've been floundering. A lot of water companies want to push up their prices, and are pushing up their prices, to fund repairs to infrastructure that they have allowed to become absolutely diabolical. Why are the taxpayers paying that? These companies are making eye-watering sums of money. Instead of paying their shareholders eye-watering sums of money, how about they spend that money to fix what they broke? But for some reason, that's not good enough. And for some reason, the government is not stepping in to rein this in. And you see the same thing happen with our energy companies, with our transport. And it's obscene, it's absurd. And this is the sort of thing that people want to see Labour address. The Tories weren't going to address this because, let's face it, half of them are probably getting backhanders and making money out of it somehow themselves. They had no interest in changing the system. To be fair, when we voted for Labour, I didn't particularly think they were going to make massive changes, but I thought they might maybe, just maybe, show more sympathy for the working man, and woman, But nope, they've done none of that. And the danger now, and I'm going to spin into slightly different territory here, the danger now, when you look at voting intentions and polls, is that all of a sudden there's been a surge of support for the Reform Party, Nigel Farage and his ilk. I cannot comprehend why in the world there would be such a groundswell of support for such an odious party. Remember, Nigel Farage was one of the people who helped push for the absolute disaster, and excuse my language here, the absolute clusterfuck that is Brexit. And he and his party have long backed what they call a hard Brexit, which is basically cutting all ties with Europe with no clue as to how to go about actually handling things like trade and that kind of thing. They would almost certainly, this is one of the fears with reform, and I can believe it as well, they would almost certainly want to gut the NHS and convert us more towards an American-style system of healthcare, and the American healthcare system is one of the leading reasons why people in America go bankrupt. So I'd really rather not see that system here. And the bottom line is they are a party with no clue of what to actually do once they got into power. They've recently had infighting. They've only got 5 MPs, and they've been at each other's throats. They're a disorganised rabble that, I cannot comprehend how the British public are being duped so thoroughly by them. Well, actually, no, I can comprehend it. Part of the problem is the media, in particular the likes of the BBC, are giving this small-time party of grifters and idiots, to be blunt, loads of airtime on their shows. Where's the airtime? Where's the balanced airtime for other parties? The Green Party, for example. I think the Greens are an exceptional party. I think their policies and ideas would be much fairer across the board for the British public. Maybe they wouldn't be quite so kind to the super rich and those who seek to profit off everyone else's hard labour, but I think they would be, generally speaking, much, much, much better for the British public in general. And yet they get far less airtime on the media. I mean, we witnessed this during elections. There should be fair and balanced and unbiased reports during elections, but it doesn't really happen anymore. And so consequently, good political parties with good plans get kind of drowned out by the loud chest-thumping gammons that are reform. And it just makes me, actually might have gathered, a little bit angry. The whole thing is broken. And the party that I voted for Labour. I'll put my hands on my heart and say I voted for Labour. We voted for people that we thought might fix things. Instead, they're not, or they're doing it in a far more glacial way than they should. I understand that to fix all the damage done by the Tories over the span of the past 14 or years or so is an extremely difficult task. I understand that. It's not going to happen overnight. Labour were never going to come in and within a year have made everything glorious and better. The problem is that Labour are not showing any indications that they're going to do that. They are still moving in a direction which is too close to how the Tories operated. They still value profit ahead of people. And guess what? Reform will also value profit ahead of people, perhaps even more so than the Tories do. So, it baffles me that people are somehow seriously pondering reform as a potential government. The way things currently stand with some of the polls is the suggestion that they could actually win a lot more seats at the next general election, which is, of course, quite a long way down the line. Things can change, but it's sort of a scary thought that we could end up with a hung parliament, with reform being, there or thereabouts. I think as things currently stand, Labour would have a majority, but not enough to actually form a government. So Labour would have to enter into a coalition, which is crazy. One thing that reform would do is they would possibly actually gain more votes than the Tories, and that's both sad and hilarious. It goes to show how far the Tories have sunk. They've become almost increasingly, or are becoming increasingly, a non-entity in British politics, which is no great surprise. They destroyed the country over the last 14 years. I'm ranting because I'm annoyed, I'm angry, I'm disappointed with so many elements of British politics right now. I think so many of our problems could be solved if someone in power simply had the guts and the courage and the conviction to say, we are going to tax the wealthy and we're not going to put the burden onto the middle and working classes. And sure, there'd be lots of hand-wringing, squealing, protests, but you've got to remember, as I say, you could collect £50 billion from the UK's top 5 richest people, and they would all still be multi-billionaires. So that just goes to show how much money they have. And it's impossible for them to use all of that. And yes, okay, some of that money will be tied up in assets in some way, shape or form, property, etc., but some of it will undoubtedly be cold, hard cash that they've got that's just sitting there, that's serving no purpose other than to accumulate itself. And you have to kind of think to yourself, what's the point? You look at people like Elon Musk, although admittedly he's not a good example of how to run a business. Him, Zuckerberg, Bezos, people with hundreds of billions of pounds, of dollars, and you think, why does any one person need all that? Okay, they could be, between them, bringing most of America out of poverty and doing all kinds of great things for people around the world. They don't. They hoard their wealth. There's a great analogy here that people have shared before, and I'm going to share it now. If we saw a monkey hoarding loads and loads of food and denying that food to other monkeys, we would assume there was something psychologically wrong with that monkey. We would assume there was a problem somewhere in that particular part of monkey society. And yet, when human beings do it, we laud them. I mean, there are people out there who think Elon Musk is the best thing since sliced bread. He really isn't. Leaving aside the suggestion that he might have Nazi-ish undertones, as a businessman, he's actually not been that brilliant. I mean, you look at the way he's tanked Twitter. You look at the way that Tesla is fumbling. He's not a great example of a businessman. He's not a great example of a man, other than the fact that he's a man who can hoard wealth. And the same, you could argue, applies to anyone else in those positions where they're super wealthy. And they're just hoarding it for the sake of hoarding it, while other people starve. There are people in the richest countries on earth who are going hungry, who can't afford to heat their homes. And that's a shocking set of circumstances. And to bring back to the original point, with that in mind, why is the UK's Labour government, supposedly a party of the people, planning to squeeze those people even harder when there are other options? Grow some resolve. Show a bit of strength, a bit of conviction, a bit of courage. And look at these people who are hoarding all this wealth. Look at these businesses that are evading taxes and all that kind of stuff. And actually pursue that. You could raise enormous sums of money to pump into public services, and you wouldn't need to hurt the people who suffer most when you make these cuts. Now, unfortunately, it's highly unlikely that anyone in the Labour government will see this video. And even if they did, I suspect most Labour MPs are going to quietly sit on their hands on this one, irrespective of what they actually think. If by some miracle chance, Keir Starmer, you happen to see this video, to hear my voice, to hear my words, please stop to remember you do not serve shareholders. You serve the British public. By squeezing the British public harder over benefits, you are not serving them. Not when there are other better options.